Alrighty. Okay. So the section this week is called, the section of the Torah this week is called Balak. And it tells the story of the king of Moab, whose name was Balak, and that he got deathly afraid after there were various other kings that were sort of protecting his borders that fell to this insurgent Israelite nation that just was coming up through the desert from Egypt. They didn't come directly when the desert for 40 years, but Sichon, the king of the Amorites, attacked them and was wiped out. And so was another couple of other kings. So Moab got very worried. And he figured out, he wasn't a stupid man, he figured out that the best way to deal with it was to use their methods against them. And what are their methods? So the Talmud explains that the power of the Jewish people is only in their mouths, Now, what does that mean? Our power is in our mouths. Well, I mean, if you want to make jokes about it, maybe eating is part of it, but many Jews overeat, unfortunately. I think it's a leftover from the Holocaust when people didn't have food for years on end. But anyway, whatever, let's not get into it. The idea of our power is in our mouths means it's the power of prayer and the power of Torah. Torah is God's wisdom. And when one repeats God's wisdom, you become a vessel for it. And especially through prayer, which is a process of purification, self-purification, and ultimately what's called dveikut. Dveikut, cleaving up above, which is a subject that I hope to discuss one of these days. Now, one of the results of dveikut, of cleaving up above, dveikut is a whole subject, particularly in Hasidic teachings, but also in the Kabbalistic teachings with Arizal and in Rabbi Abraham Abulafia. They don't talk about it so much as they could, but they talk about it more as concentration on holy names and so on and so forth. That's basically Kabbalistic meditation, and we can discuss that at some point in time in the future. But this idea of dveikut, cleaving up above until one completely loses oneself in one's identity with the divine, and therefore one is able to do things that could not otherwise be done, which comes to another subject that I would like to discuss in the future as well, the idea of being able to give blessings. But we'll talk about that another time. Here we're going to talk about, in this class, we're going to talk about the blessings that came out of curses. Since the power of the Jewish people is in their mouths, Balak figured out that the best way to deal with it is to use their methods against them, and therefore he wanted to get a prophet from the nations of the world, from one of the nations, to curse out the Jewish people to prevent them getting blessed from up above. And that's where he came to Balaam, or Balaam as it's usually translated into English. He went to Balaam and asked him to curse out the Jewish people, which Balaam was actually very happy to do. Why? Why was he happy to do this? Because he was the opposite, says the Arizal, he was the opposite of Moses, of Moshe Rabbeinu, of Moses. It was exactly the opposite. He was the other side of the coin, you might want to say, of Moses. In other words, he was the person that instead of blessings coming out of his mouth and Torah coming out, the exact opposite. So you may ask the question now, how could it possibly be then that Balaam was actually a prophet? Some of the prophecies that he gave were actually very lofty prophecies and did in fact transpire, they came true. How could he possibly have been a prophet? Is not prophecy one of the gifts from above that, as we know, is only given to those who are worthy thereof. In other words, you can't force the doors open. You might be able to hack the doors temporarily. And to a certain extent, that's really what Balaam did. But if the doors are hacked temporarily, then what happens is they usually close behind you, and the person is trapped often enough between the doors. So how did Balaam get this prophecy? There's a very interesting teaching from the Baal Shem Tov, which is actually a fascinating idea. And he says like this, one of the things that Balaam says about himself, he says like this, Ne'um hagever shetum ha'ayin, says the man with the closed up eye or the blind eye. One of his eyes was blind. Now, how he came to be blind, I don't have to go into now, but in any event, he was blind in one eye, says the Baal Shem Tov. Because it was necessary to make him into a prophet for reasons which we'll discuss a little bit later, but it was necessary to make him into a prophet, he had to deliver certain prophecies. Yeah, the backside, I suppose you could say, yes. The backside of Moses, yes, that's true. Very observant of you. He was given the spirit of prophecy, but because he was blind in one eye, it was possible to give him prophecy. That eye, so to speak, had never sinned because it was blind. So, in other words, the Baal Shem Tov says a person has 5 senses, and prophecy usually comes to the person through one of the 5 senses. Either he sees visions, or he hears voices, or he's able to scent something, as it says about the advent of the Messiah when he comes. V'hiricho b'reach Hashem, he will be able to sniff out things. That will be his method of prophecy. Now, let's not take it too literally, because we don't mean necessarily being able to smell good and evil, but the sense of smell is actually the loftiest of the senses. It's even higher than the sense of sight. Why? Because Kabbalistically, it comes from a higher place. It comes from the level of, it comes from the 2 nostrils, which actually the name Samach Gimel and the name Sag. Anyway, I don't want to get into it too deeply, but the idea is that the spirit of prophecy that comes from the ability to scent things, to in other words, the spiritual ability behind scent, that is a very lofty possibility. There's one of the Tanaim, one of the authors of the rabbinical code called the Mishnah, was called Baal HaChotem. He was called the master of the nose, so to speak. And that's not because he had a big nose either, although that may have been, we don't know, but because he was able to get the scent of things which are very elusive. Scent is really the most elusive of the senses. In other words, the subject of scent is very elusive and can only be discerned by very sensitive people, because it's such a lofty sense. In any event, there's a sense of sight and there's a sense of taste. Taste is also tamu uru'u ki tov Hashem, taste and see that God is good. There's a concept of taste as well. And then there's a concept ultimately of touch. All of them can lead, or rather, all of them can be the doorway, the gateway to prophecy. So although Balaam was not worthy of prophecy because he had one eye that was still pure since it was blind, he was blind in that eye, therefore he could receive prophecy. It says the Baal Shem Tov, we have to understand, be aware that we can purify our senses and maybe focus particularly on one sense, whether it's a sense of sight or whether it's a sense of hearing, etc. One has to, in order to purify the sense of sight, so you have to be very careful with what you look at. You can't look at negative things. You can't look at things that entice and how would you say, megare the Yetzer Hara, and that wake up and incite, that's the word I'm looking for, incite a person's inclination to evil, or the evil inclination, if you will. In other words, for example, pornography, or just violence, looking at violence and things like that. It doesn't do you any good. And this kind of thing taints a person's ability to see the good. Similarly with hearing and so on and so forth, Lashon Hara, there's various other things. So that's why Balaam was able to receive this prophecy. It was granted to him because he had one eye that was blind and therefore had not tainted itself, it had not become impure. Okay, so Balaam goes out, and on 3 different occasions, Balak takes him to 3 different mountaintops, and where he sees, from which you can see the Israelites, the Jewish people, and he curses them 3 times. He took him 3 times to curse them, rather, and instead he blesses them 3 times. Instead of cursing them, he blesses them 3 times. Makes you think of dogs and why Scripture is so lacking in their mention. Yeah, Scripture does mention dogs here and there, but usually in somewhat of a negative light. I think dogs in those days were not the Arizal says that the word kelev, the word dog in Hebrew, kelev, is it's an abbreviated form of the words kulo leiv, kelev, kulo leiv. It's all heart, it's all emotions. A dog is all emotions. And they didn't know how good they could smell. I think they did probably, but I think dogs were a lot more vicious in those days than they are today. So, they've been trained and so on and so forth. But anyway, yeah. It's definitely true that they have that sense of smell. Yeah, that's how they find victims, actually, and bloodhounds and things like that in tragedies like the one in Florida, unfortunately. In any event, let's continue. The idea, therefore, is that Balaam utters what he intended to be curses, but came out as blessings. All of them came out as blessings. Now, there's an interesting teaching from someone who is named fondly the Alter Rebbe, the Old Rebbe. He's the third generation of Hasidim. The first generation of Hasidim was obviously the Baal Shem Tov. And then the next generation was the Maggid Mezrich, the disciple of the Baal Shem Tov. And then came one of the disciples. He had many disciples. One of the chief disciples, perhaps the chief disciple of the Maggid Mezrich, was someone named Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the author of the Tanya and many other books. Anyway, the Alter Rebbe says as follows, that all of the curses that you find in the Torah, all of the curses that you find, even those for instance, in Parshas Bechukotai and Parshas Kitavo, all of them are actually blessings. All of the curses are actually blessings. Now, this is kind of strange. Like, if they're curses, if they're curses, how can you understand them as blessings? And if they're blessings, why are they uttered as curses? Seems to be a rather strange thing. So, in order to be able to understand that, there's a story which is told in the Talmud. It's a story in the Gemara, which is Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara, I'm sorry, not a Gemara in Sanhedrin, it's Moed Katan. A Gemara Talmud, a Talmudic tractate named Moed Katan. And it says over there that that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, sent his son Elazar, who was also himself a very accomplished mystic. He sent him to 2 other sages. Their names were Yonatan ben Asmai and Rabbi Yehuda ben Geirim. He sent them to these 2 sages to get their blessings. So the young man went to these 2 sages, or maybe he was a boy at the time, I don't know. But anyway, let's say a young man at the time, he went to these 2 sages, and instead of blessing him, they cursed him. When he came home, he was, as you can imagine, he was a little upset. And so he said to his father, what is what's going on over here? You sent me to get blessings, and in fact, they cursed me. Exactly the opposite of what Balak says to Balaam. He says, I sent you to curse them, and you gave them blessings. Exactly the opposite. So Rabbi Shimon laughed, and he said, let me explain their curses to you. And he explained all of their curses as blessings. He explained how all of them, he analyzed them, and he explained that all of their curses that they gave were, in fact, the highest and loftiest blessings. Why did they then express them as curses? Because certain blessings are so elevated and so lofty that they can't be expressed they can't be expressed in positive form. They can only be expressed in the negative. But if you understand the negative, then you can understand the positive. So the question you could ask is, why then did they express them in this way? Yes, it's possible, obviously, that they couldn't be expressed in the positive, but they could have just kept silent. Why did they have to utter them in a negative sense? They could have just blessed them in their hearts, and that would have been good enough. So there's a commentary called the Maharsha. Maharsha says, Reb Shmuel Edels, he says that the reason for that is that this was to sharpen the mind of Rabbi Elazar, that he would examine things and understand them, then come to and understand them as blessings. In other words, there was a teaching that was something that they wanted to show him. They wanted to show him that whatever event happens, the inner dimension thereof, even terrible events, just like this thing that we had in Florida, this terrible accident, the inner dimension in one sense or another is the core, the inner core has a blessing in it. Whatever that blessing may happen to be, I don't know, but whatever that blessing may happen to be. In any event, that's what the Maharsha says. To get Rabbi Elazar to learn to examine things, to bring the good out of the bad, to learn to discern the positive from the negative. There's another commentary, another great Hasidic sage, in fact, the grandson of the Alter Rebbe, the grandson of the author of the Tanya, Rabbi Shneur Zalman Liadi. His grandson was named the Tzemach Tzedek, or Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Lubavitch. So Rabbi Menachem Mendel said as follows. He says, "We don't have to, you don't have to scratch your right ear with your left hand. We could just understand that these blessings were so lofty that's why they had to be expressed in the negative. You cannot always describe something of infinite quality you can't describe something of infinite quality using finite words. Therefore, you have to say what it's not. You cannot say what it is, but you have to say what it's not. And that's what these blessings were. These blessings that he gave, in other words, the blessings that those two sages gave Rebbe Elazar were so lofty that they expressed the negative from which the positive becomes immediately clear without actually having to analyze it at great length. Okay, so that is the basis on which we're going to understand these blessings of Balaam, that the curses that he intended actually were blessings, and they were heard as blessings, they were uttered as blessings, but they were in fact intended to be originally curses. Now, the Talmud has a very interesting analysis of this and says that from the words of his curses, from the words of his blessings, you can understand what his intention really was. And then it goes on to examine only the third blessings. Just 1 second, let me answer a question here. Could we say that a curse is a blessing that we don't know what to do with at this time? Yes, I would say that is, well, let's put it this way, that we generally don't know what to do with, but there are certain people who do know what to do with them. Like, for example, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was immediately able to translate the curses into blessings. There are people in our times too who are able to immediately transform the curses into blessings by expressing their inner core, what they are actually there to do as blessings. So that is indeed correct. Now, okay, so the Talmud, in examining them, only examines the third set the third set of blessings that he gave, and not the first two. And the question is, why only the third set? So in order to explain that, we have to explain another Talmudic analysis of this. I'll get to you in a second, Aidan. The Talmud goes on to say like this. It says that the blessings that Balaam gave eventually reverted to curses, but only the first two reverted to curses. The third one did not revert to a curse. And we have to explain why. That is what the core of what I want to give over tonight is all about. Why the first two blessings were able to revert to curses and the third one was not. But let me just answer this question first. Is it like the very powerful blessings could be jinxed if spoken in the positive form? Yes, that's another aspect of it. That is another aspect of it. It's not necessarily the only aspect. And therefore, it's what's called ayin hara, right? The evil eye. So it is. You're right. In Jewish folklore, there are many stories about how women in particular would say things that seem to be the opposite of what they wanted to say, and the only reason they said it like that was in order to avoid the evil eye, so to speak. Yes, that's a possibility, but I think the way that Tzemach Tzedek is explaining it, the way Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Lubavitch is explaining it, is that there are too lofty to be, what happened here all of a sudden? They are too lofty to be transmitted as blessings, just too lofty, and not only because they could be jinxed, but simply they don't fit into the clothing, the limited clothing. Joshua Trachtenberg, a lot of writing on that. If anyone is interested, if you wouldn't mind sending a link. If you wouldn't mind sending to my email as well. Listener couldn't possibly interpret the meaning clearly enough to grasp the wholeness of the blessing. Yeah, that's also true. Which is why he needed his father, Rabbi Shimon, to be able. He was young at the time, and he had not had the experience to be able to do this. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, just while we're on the subject, this becomes a habit, a positive habit. Whenever anything negative happens, do not leave it as something negative. Rather, translate it as something positive. We've spoken about this many times. The concept is expressed particularly by the Baal Shem Tov in the section, the story of Noah, when it says that Noah made an ark, a window for the ark. When he made the ark, he made a window for the ark, and God tells him, "Tzohar ta'aseh l'teva," make a window for the ark, right? Make a window for the ark. And this window, the Zohar actually has two explanations. Either it was a window or it was a source of light. Either a window or a source of light. The sages speak about this as well. But the Baal Shem Tov says like this: the same word that there is for tzara, let me write this down on a board here so you'll be able to see it clearly. The same word that you have for anguish and suffering and negative, that's the word tzara. If you turn it around and give it a different permutation, it is called Zohar. All you have to do is turn the last two letters around and it's called Zohar. Then it becomes a window. That's a window. That here is tzara, anguish, suffering. So the Baal Shem Tov says that if you learn to reframe things in the right way, they call it in modern psychology reframing, right? This was a method that was used from the time of Abraham Abulafia, Middle Ages. This was a thing that he did all the time. It was one of his primary Kabbalistic, practical Kabbalah methods of switching things around. And where did he get that from? He actually got it from the Sefer Yetzirah, right? That comes from the Sefer Yetzirah, and we'll be discussing this when we get to our classes in the Sefer Yetzirah, which is coming up next Wednesday, folks. Just a little plug, a little reminder. We are having a class starting in Sefer Yetzirah next Wednesday, we will be looking at the Aria Kaplan translation. I think I sent it to everybody, which was very kindly shared with to me by Michaela. And it is a free copy that you can use. And yeah, all right, so to get back to our subject. How did these blessings, two of the blessings reverted to curses, but one didn't revert to curses. The one remained blessings forever. And I'll discuss the difference between them now. What actually happened? The first two curses that he intended to utter, but he was forced to utter blessings, is because he had a divine visitation as he was about to utter his curses. And God warned him, you say what I tell you or else. Now, what did he do to elicit? What he had tried to do was to elicit divine help, let's call it, divine assistance, to curse the Jewish people, because he knew how to, he knew when the hour was bad. That was one thing. Everybody who's a magician, a sorcerer, a negative kind of a person, deals in the power of the negative, knows when the hour is bad. That is part of astrology and these various forces that are used, negative forces that are used. They use them when the negative forces in the universe prevail for a time. So he knew when the negative forces ought to prevail, and that's why he made sacrifices at that time, and so on and so forth. And he was intending to use these negative forces to curse out the Israelites. However, God appears to him and says to him, you say what I tell you or else. And he was kind of forced to say blessings instead of curses. But that only happened the first two times. The third time, he did not go and offer these sacrifices. He told Balak to go and offer sacrifices, whatever. He didn't go. And he went and he looked over the Israelites. He went up on the hill and he looked over them, and suddenly he saw, this is the way the Zohar interprets it, he saw the Spirit of God hovering above the Israelites. And he was so inspired by that he uttered his own blessings. In other words, these were not forced blessings, but these were blessings that came as some sort of transformation that went on within him. Now, the Arizal explains that this temporary transformation was because Balaam, like Moses, was a reincarnation. Moses was a reincarnation of the positive aspects of Abel, Hevel, and Balaam was the reincarnation of his negative aspects. The negative aspects of Hevel were then absorbed by Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel sort of fused together into Balaam. So you can imagine what his intentions were, murderous. But that's why he had this power of speech. The word Hevel in Hebrew actually means breath. He had the power of the breath, which is the power of speech. He had the power to curse, and because he had the power of speech, but it was on the negative side of speech rather than the positive, whereas Moses has the positive side of speech. Okay, so that is what happened. The third time, he was divinely inspired by what he saw, but in other words, the Spirit of God upon Israel inspired him to say blessings. And therefore he blessed of his own accord, and therefore the blessings did not revert to negative qualities. You may say as follows, that his curses were displaced by the blessings that God forced him to utter the first two times. But the third time, there was no displacement necessary because he became temporarily transformed, only temporarily, but still. Therefore, there are two kinds of blessings. There are blessings that are hidden blessings, where they sometimes appear to be curses, and then they reveal blessings. Now, we all want to reveal blessings, but don't ignore the hidden blessings. In other words, the blessings that come to us perhaps in the garment of a curse, in the garment, in a negative garment, the garment of negativity, a garment of something that is unwanted, undesirable, apparently. If one knows how to make use of it, and you know how to turn around the inner core of it to reveal the positive, then it can be a very positive. It can be a very positive thing. I'll give you another example. Let me just share a screen here again, and clear all drawings. Okay, there's another word. There's another word in Hebrew which is called retzach. Retzach means murder, right? Retzach, murder. Now, if you transform this, in other words, transpose the letters, then the letters can be changed into rachatz. Rachatz. Now, usually when there's certain letters, when they come at the end of the word, they're actually written differently. So this would be written like this. It would be written like this, rachatz, but never mind. It doesn't matter. Only let me just undo that one. In script, it would be written like this, right? It would be written like that. No, actually, I'm sorry. That's I don't write script too often, so let me just redo that. It would be written like this. I'm sorry. This is how it would be written in script, right? Rachatz. So that letter, rachatz, means to wash, to cleanse, right? To cleanse. There's also another. There are other combinations of this. There's this combination as well. Haratz means to engrave something, and it also means to be. It means alacrity, charut, right? And someone who has alacrity. So so we can transform negative qualities by understanding the name of things. You can transform the negative into the positive. Okay, let me. There was a question, or a couple of questions or remarks. Let's see. Interesting. His journey of blessing actually landed, even though he spurred Balak into evil. By telling him to do the sorcery. Yeah, that's true. How is his ability to turn around the curse taught? I'm sure you'll get there, but I'm curious. Okay, we will get there. Through the understanding of language, for one, you have to have the right keys to grasp the full meaning of Hashem's will, even if you perceive it to be a curse to start off with. Yes. Now, a lot of the transformation of a curse is not simply by manipulating letters. Manipulating letters is only the proof that it can be done. It's not that is correct. And in the month of Tammuz is exactly the right time to do that, Tammuz and Av. The idea is not simply to manipulate the letters. Now, let me explain my idea. What one has to be able to understand is that the inner core of whatever's happening now is in fact a blessing. No evil descends from above. No evil descends from above. So if you believe that everything comes from above, comes from God ultimately, it can't possibly be evil. And therefore, one has to look for the inner core of that, how it could be manifested in a positive way. Now, one of the ways in which you can look for that is by manipulating the letters of the name of that thing, the letters of the name of that event. That's one way of doing it. It's not the only way of doing it. There's gematria, numerical values. There are simply letter exchanges. There are letter exchanges, a method called Atbash and Gardam and various other, there's letter exchanges. Letters are a tool for the excavation. It's a very nice way of putting it. The goodness is already there, but it's possible to reveal the goodness without doing any letter manipulation at all. Letter manipulation is just one of the tools. It's a very useful tool, and one that one can learn fairly easily. But it's not the only tool. The main tool is the mind and the mindset. In other words, if one's belief is such that whatever descends from above is positive, that's already changing the negative into, it's already starting to change the negative into a positive. Now, it might take some time to manifest, but that's the way it is. One can, if one can see the negative, one can see the positive within the negative, then it's already, it's transforming it. The outer shell is negative, and that breaks, or it thins the outer shell to the extent that sooner or later that shell is going to break and reveal the inner good in it. Yes, it demands some work. It's not just, 30 seconds worth of thinking about it. One has to sometimes meditate very deeply on such a thing in order to be able to bring out the inner core thereof. But that's what is essentially required. This is, in many ways, this is what practical Kabbalah does. Practical Kabbalah is not just using formulae in order to make things happen. It's also, this is mostly the methodology, in fact, of the Baal Shem Tov and the Hasidic masters, it's using the mind to transform the negative into positive. And the letters just reveal that. The letters are the garment which shows that this is in fact the case. About more transformative holy, would Hashem choose one form of blessing hidden over the other revealed? It depends on the circumstance, depends on the person, depends on a number of different things. I don't claim to speak for God, so I can't really say what he would choose in any particular situation. But if we do face some kind of negative situation, and some situations are tragic, and simply the proper thing to do is to cry, and not necessarily attempt to make it into visible good, at least not initially. That takes time. But to just accept that this is the way it is, and to commiserate with those that are suffering, or to express oneself in pain and tears, that happens. Unfortunately, it's a real thing. No, I wouldn't say only God knows, but God knows why he does it in the way that he does it. I wouldn't say that it's impossible for anyone else to know. I think it is possible for people to know, and someone who's trained themselves in this methodology can often, I'll tell you a little story, just to, it's a little story, and it probably won't, most of you probably won't relate to the story so much anyway, because it's sort of an inner circle story. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, blessed memory. So he often made what's called a Farbrengen. Farbrengen means like a gathering, and they very often these gatherings went often into the night, 2, 3, 4 in the morning, sometimes through the whole night. And lots talking and teaching and so on and so forth. In any event, very often the Rebbe, as he's called, the Rebbe would go to the graveside of his father-in-law, and he'd spend many hours there, and then he would come back, and usually he would come back at night, and not having eaten the whole day, because he would go to the grave fasting. And one night he came back, and he said he wants to give out a pamphlet that he had, a booklet. Yeah, a booklet that he had asked to be printed with a certain Hasidic discourse in it. So the secretaries were hoping that the rabbi would eat something before, or at least drink something before he did this, because they knew that to give out this pamphlet, this booklet, would take several hours, because there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people. It would take several hours, so they wanted him to have a bite to eat at least before. So they said, okay, they announced we're going to make a break while while we prepare. The stuff didn't yet come from the printers. We have to go get it from the printers. So we'll take an hour break. So the Rebbe said to them, why make it a break? Make it a join. We'll just continue, right? Don't make it a break, we'll make it a join. That's the kind of attitude. In other words, not looking at the break side of things, but how things can be joined together, right? Now, again, this is a story that not everybody's going to relate to, but that is that's kind of the attitude, the mindset that leads to positive outcomes. Okay, so okay, what time is the class? And you say it's here on Wednesday. Yes, Wednesday, this coming Wednesday at 8 p.m. Central Time. That would be 8 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. West Coast, and 9 p.m. East Coast. So same time as this one, yeah. The Book of Practical Kabbalah. Can that help us understand this better? I'm not sure what the Book of Practical Kabbalah is, but that sounds like a translation of a title, and I'm not sure who wrote it or what book that is. There you go, Hank and Shirley. Great, Eli Melech. Fantastic. And the first few minutes we spoke about other things anyway, but the recording will be up. That's the kind of mindset, that's the kind of attitude that changes negative into positive. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what we have to do. There are many classes on the internet, and unfortunately Torah classes as well, and teachers, rabbis, I'm sure holy rabbis and good people and positive people and so on and so forth. But very often they look at the negative side of things, the sin in things and the negative and where do we go wrong and so on. Yeah, sometimes you have to look at where you went wrong. It's true. Sometimes you do have to look at that. But the more transformative way of looking at things is always to look at the positive side of things. And when one trains oneself in that kind of methodology, you'll find that the world looks like a much brighter place than when you look at it the other way. Yep, that's the story. Okay. I'm not sure if there are other questions, but okay. No worries. Okay, folks, I think we'll leave it at that then. And class again on Wednesday night. If anyone still needs to get the book, the Sefer Yetzirah book, please email me at Kabbalah Decoded. Let me just write it down over here. KabbalahDecoded@gmail.com. KabbalahDecoded@gmail.com. Just send me an email to there, and I will send you a. Can you talk about the training one can undertake to learn that transformational mindset? Yes, you'll get an email. Yeah, you'll get an email reminder. Yes, with the link. Sure. Is there training one can undertake to learn the transformation mindset? Yes, there is training you can take, but there's different kinds of training. There are different types of training. One of the trainings is to learn discourses from, in other words, Hasidic discourses primarily from the Hasidic rabbis who have this mindset, and well, most of them do, but if you want some suggestions, I can certainly point you to some good works that do that. Am I changing this class to Wednesday nights? Someone, Ruth is asking. No, I was intended to give both classes. I know it's a little much for some of you, but both classes are recorded and you can listen to If necessary, you can listen to one in recording or to both on recordings or whatever it is. Prostrate oneself in front of the writings again. I wouldn't put it like that. It's a way of learning how to think, and you can only learn how to think like that from example. You have to learn how to. The Zohar does it as well. I mean, the Zohar always thinks of things in this kind of way, in this positive way. So, I mean, unless you have a teacher directly who could teach you this, the other way to do it is through reading, through learning. The teachings of Baal Shem Tov are very informative in this regard, and also there are various works which one should read. Okay, a particular book. I have a copy which I could send you, a PDF, which I got from Michaela, and I can send it on to you. If you want to just send me an email, I will attach this copy of Sefer Yetzirah and send it to you. Again, if anyone wants, you're welcome, Wendy. Looking forward to seeing you too. If anyone needs a copy, again, please just email me, kabbalahdecoded@gmail.com, and I will send you a copy. I will probably also have it, I'll just have it online in case people don't have copies, and I'll show you inside the book where we're holding, or I'll put it on the other screen, and we can read it from there. We're not going to be doing a lot of reading from the book. The commentary I'm not going to look at so much. It's going to be original commentary from mostly Hasidic teachings and from the Arizal, and then that's how we proceed.